Wayne says he still doesn't care about the Shovers or the Indians, let alone the Stevenson Patriots, but once in a while, Ruth, 3 times now to be exact, he'll throw on a Bulls game on the TV in his room and invite me upstairs to watch with him. And the silver lining, the gold lining really, even platinum if you think about it, is that during timeouts and halftimes we'd listen to all this music Wayne's into, and even though the guys who sing it seem fruity, it's okay because they're joking about the fruitiness. What they're really doing is making fun of dudes who think it isn't fruity to look all fruity. Wayne and the other skids don't get that at all because they're always so serious. But all you really have to do is to have a sense of humor, to see that even the bands who might actually be a little fruity have earned the right to be fruity to like that because they're geniuses. Mostly they're joking on skids, though. It's subtle. It's great music Wayne listens to, though, is my point. And plain and simple, wasn't for Wayne, I'd have never heard of Led Zeppelin. And if I'd never heard of Led Zeppelin, I'd have never heard Led Zeppelin. You see what I'm saying? I have never known Stairway to Heaven, hands down, was the best song ever on what is, bottom line, the best album ever in all the history of music. If Wayne, to sum it up, never became a skid and started, in a nutshell, listening to their music, then no doubt I couldn't have, long story short, had my creative revelation. And so, the 2000 scarf, to put it plainly, wouldn't be as sharp as you'll see in November when the order comes in, and you'll see what I mean. Apart from not being a band kid, all it took was a shover. To be a shover was the annual scarf. It was made of red wool with white fringes and embroidery, and all the shovers wore it the same, tied around the neck in an overhand knot with the right leg 2 times the length of the left, so that none of the signifiers went unexposed. On the right, by the shoulder, was Chief Aptekisic, feather headdressed and ear-ringed, a silhouette in war paint, the year of the season in thin Roman numerals that look like whiskers along his square jawline. Beneath that, the numbers assigned to the players, JV and varsity on top, and on the left, above the fringe that hung just beneath the heart, the names of the varsity A-team starters, captains at the bottom, so they wouldn't get covered if the knot slipped low, then up to the neck, reverse alphabetically. This design had been constant for 5 years running, but its left leg had always been the problem. Since players improved at various rates, lineups were always subject to adjustment, and by the start of every season, since the Shovers had been founded, at least one Indian on the bench or the B team took an A-team position from another player whose name had already been embroidered on the scarf. The cause of the problem was variously diagnosed. Some blamed the scarf's maker for 6 weeks if its factory took to fill orders, which meant DeSormy had to give to the Shovers his rosters that far in advance of the season. Some blamed Shover presidents for failing to find a blame DeSormy himself for being fickle with his lineups, or the victim of brain disease. Many of the Shovers didn't care either way. The important thing to them was for the scars to identify Shovers as Shovers. Among the proponents of scarf reform, though, 2004 was invoked almost daily. That year, a captain got bumped from the lineup. Within 3 weeks of the scarf being ordered, Bam Slocum, till then a middling 6th grade player, had grown 4 inches taller and 10 times as dominant. He came off the bench of the JVB team to play A-team on varsity as a starting point guard, and went on to break, in the 8 weeks following, 3 Aptekisic and 2 conference scoring records. The captain Bam replaced was called Gregory Gum, and to get gummed became slang that for Shovers was fighting words, harsher even than any phrase it might have euphemized. Not that Shovers actually fought. The events they call fights were chest bump engagements where one guy said, "What?" and the other guy said, "So do something." And sometimes a third or fourth said, "Yeah, do something." A few of the Shovers were stooges for Indians carrying their textbooks, doing their homework, hearing hints of affection under verbal abuse, but most of them only aspired to be stooges. They met twice a month, shoved around Main Hall, and, as of only very recently, had seemed poised to schism over trouble that stemmed from their scarf's new design. By the end of the 2005-2006 school year, the scarf reform issue was so starkly polarized that the shovers had forgotten its mechanics. You either wanted reform, whatever that meant, or you didn't want reform, regardless of what it meant. Most of the shovers' debates went like this. They may not be perfect, but our scarves are the best. So don't rock the boat, Holmes. It's dangerous. All I said is 2004, dude. 2004. Thus, when during his pre-election speech, Blake Acer spoke of his scarf redesign plan, a plan that would alter the scarf's left leg looks, but didn't address the real problem, the problem of imminent roster change, scarf making lead time, embroidery permanence itself. Taboo. The majority by which he would soon acquire victory was simple, in more than one sense of the word. The really dumb shover fixed on redesign, which sounded a lot like reform, and those among them who wanted reform thought Blake backed their cause and voted for him. Those among them who didn't want reform thought Blake opposed their cause and voted against him. The less dumb shovers, both those who wanted reform and didn't, saw that Blake Acer, intentionally or not, had undermined reform with redesign. And they voted the opposite of those really dumb shovers who shared their position on reform. The split between the two kinds of dumb was pretty even, but the few undecideds knew Blake to be the brother of the shovers' founder, and they figured the blood was good, so Blake won. The morning after the election, during the announcements, Blake reiterated for all of Aptekisik the details of the scarf redesign plan. Over the summer, I had a creative revelation, and the creative revelation that I had was this. However smartly colored and intelligently organized and totally perfect on the right leg our scarves are, they'd be even better without English on the left. This creative revelation was what got me elected. So that's what we're getting rid of. All the English and replacing the names of our starters with symbols. Symbols the starters will choose for themselves. Symbols that really mean something to them. Like the symbols the guys in Led Zeppelin chose to represent their souls on the cover of 4. Really deep symbols that mean more than words, that mean more than names, symbols that capture the spirit of each starter as a person as well as a player. Thank you. Co-Captain Baxter, at lunch that day, stood on a table and shouted for attention. Then, raising his can of protein drink, said, Pam and I were sitting here talking to the Indians, and we all agree that this moment's historic, and we all agree this year's Indians are historic, and this school is historic. And on behalf of all the school, and especially basketball, Bam and I want to thank the shovers for voting for Acer, who's really got a vision here that's also historic. Even though it can only happen for 5 of us, none of us can wait to see our symbols on the scarves. But especially not Bam and I, who are both looking forward to this chance to be creative. And I know the opportunity to be creative will motivate our teammates to seize the opportunity. It's one more reason to work hard to make starter and bring home the victory and the glory and so on. So thumbs up to Acer and his main hall shovers. We value all of you, and not just as the army of good guys you are, but each and every one of all 60, however many of you, on a first name type individual basis. We don't listen to Led Zeppelin, me and Bam and the Indians, but you can bet we're going to start this very afternoon. Right after practice, y'all. Right after practice. 3 cheers for Acer and his main hall shovers. 3 cheers for Acer. 3 cheers for the shovers. Acknowledged and praised, their 3 cheers resounded, and rifts all healed. The shovers bore Blake like a casket or champ on their shoulders to recess, feeling like brothers and knocking down band kids, smashing the fast ones against the walls and lockers. The rosters were posted 20 days later, and the varsity starters gave Acer their glyphs. Blonde Lonnie Boyd chose the cap of a jester. Co-captain Baxter a tomahawk. Bam Slocum, for reasons no one could or would say, chose peace symbols, flanking a big top tent. And then the starter, whose name no one ever got straight, the one whose replacement was himself replaced twice in the weeks leading up to the opening game, chose a bow and arrow surrounded by garland. The last of the starters to turn in his glyph was Gary the Quiet Indian Frungin, who main man attended weekly Pentecostal Mass with. A kind of nice guy who liked to shake hands when no one at school, not even Benji Nakamuk, had ever wished to bring any damage. Frungin gave Acer a red-on-white ichthybes. Shovers who were Israelites remembered they were Israelites. An emergency meeting by the dumpsters was held. The Israelites stated that wearing an ichthyus was against their religion, like wearing a cross. Yet, argued Acer, with all due respect, the ichthys was the symbol Frungin chose to express the depths of his soul creatively with. And who were they to suggest that the shovers had the right to stifle the creative expression of a soul, let alone that of the soul of an Indian? Jews, they said. They were Jews, they said. They were Jews who couldn't wear an ichthys. So then they couldn't wear an ichthys. Acer told them, so what? Maybe they could get themselves a different kind of scarf, or cover up the ichthys on their scarf with a marker. Though on second thought, the marker would be disrespectful. And on third thought, another kind of scarf would be also. Anyone would see they were singling out Frungin then. But what about another type of apparel? A smaller item that didn't feature starters. An item on which 5 symbols would not fit. Something like a hat. But not exactly a hat, because you couldn't wear a hat in the classroom. Maybe a wristband or headband or handkerchief. Maybe a patch they could sew on their outerwear. No, said the Israelites. That did not make sense. Without the scarf, you were other than a shover. But weren't they saying they were other than shovers? If no Jewish shovers could wear the ichthys, but all of the non-Jewish shovers could, then didn't that make them different from the others? If being a shover meant wearing Christian symbols, then yes, said the Israelites, but that's not what it meant, so no. The shovers don't wear Christian symbols, Blake explained. The shovers wear symbols of the starters' souls, one of which only happens to be Christian. The atheist shover, Trent Vander, weighed in then. 1,000 pounds of this, said Vander, and a half a ton of that. Vander told them Jesus was used to make war and do evil and kill the environment. So Vander wasn't crazy for the ichthys either. But Vander knew God wouldn't punish the Jews for wearing a symbol that meant nothing to them. Not if God was full of total love, which didn't matter anyway because there was no God. So why not decide the ichthys wasn't a Jesus fish? Call it 2 meaningless arcs intersecting, because that's what it was. And that's what he was doing, was being open-minded, and so they should try. The Israelite shovers demanded a plebiscite. Acer scheduled the vote for the next official meeting. Then some of the Israelites, led by Josh Berman, went to see Brodsky. If I was among them, I'd have told them not to, but I didn't tell them anything. I wasn't among them. I'd only read of them, and after the fact, before I fell in love with June and met Eliyahu, my only Israelite friend at Aptekisik was Jelly, who told me they teased her for being in the cage. Not just the ones who were shovers either, but all of the Israelites, or nearly all of them, none of whom I knew. I decided when I started at Aptekisik that I wouldn't talk to Israelites who didn't approach me. They were secular there, and they likely hadn't heard of me, but still they might have, which meant that their parents might have barred them from being my friends, and their being secular didn't make it okay for me to risk leading them towards breaking the 5th commandment. Still, of course, I'd hoped they'd approach me and tell me their parents didn't know who I was. But then After Jelly told me they teased her, I began to hope that they wouldn't approach me. After I'd read about the nonsense with the scarves, the latter hope only got stronger and stronger. They were right about one thing. Ed and I would get pissed if they wore the ichthys, but that was whole miles beside the point. The majority of shovers clearly wanted the ichthys, regardless of how the Israelites felt. And Adonai doesn't care if Gentiles wear ichthyi any more than he cares if they eat pork or have foreskins. And no one, let alone Adonai, ever told anyone he had to be a shover. And so if the shovers didn't care about the Israelites or just didn't care enough to honor Israelite law, why should they care? The laws weren't theirs, and Vandor's side the ichthys was. Why would an Israelite ever want to be a shover? If I'd been a shover, but I'd never be a shover, that was the difference. If, though, I had been, I'd have just walked out.